Hi, everybody. You are very welcome to the next in the series of Irish Voices, Global Perspectives. My name is Rosemary Gallagher. I'm the program manager here with Galway City Innovation District and the Porter Shed. And I'm very honored to be joined this evening by Elaine Brennan from Northwell Health. Elaine joined Northwell Health to create the Farmer Ventures Group, leading the innovative approach to managing and developing strategic relationships with the pharma, biotech, and device industry. And that is as much of a spoiler as I'm going to give you on the topic, because you're not here to hear from me, you're here to hear from Elaine. So Elaine, thank you for joining us this evening/morning. You're very welcome. Why don't you tell us about your background?
Great, yeah, no, and thank you for having me. Really appreciate it, and thank you, Rosemary. Well, it all started back with a call from my mother in 1994 telling me I'd won the lotto. So I was very excited with thought of millions of dollars or millions of pounds at the time flowing in, but no, it was actually a green card to America. So she had applied for the Morrison visa, which some of you may not remember that back in the day. But anyhow, came to Miami, and I did at the time my education was science, applied chemistry. So I got a job in Miami in a lab, bench chemist there for 2 years. Then at the time decided with my friend Helen to move to Boston, and there I did more on the bioengineering side, and another two and a half years in a company called Metabolics. And yes, for all you Irish people, that is Bolics with an X, Meta, but at the time it stood for metabolic engineering. So I did 2 years there and patented, published very exciting, I guess, scientific work. And one of the patents was a patent for biodegradable chewing gum, which I got a check. Wrigley's bought the patent. I got a check for $5. So that was the end of my scientific career. Decided to leg it to New York and completely pivot career choices into the commercial world. So I started in Roche Pharma, launching blockbuster products, and my role there over 5 years went from sales to the marketing team to launch products. So that was very exciting. 5 years, hepatitis C was the therapeutic area with the launch of Pegasus, and obviously learned a lot about launching therapeutics into the US market. So I was a member of an organization at the time called BioLink, which was funded by Enterprise Ireland, and basically striving or forging a networking community of biotechnology and life sciences in the New York tri-state area. So then an opportunity arose, and I was always fascinated by, I suppose, small to mid-sized companies, and what makes them successful, what doesn't. So this came up after about 5 years of me working in Roche, and I took the role of head of life sciences for the Irish government in Enterprise Ireland. And that was really a phenomenal career in that 5-year time that I was there, because I really got to understand the landscape of how and what makes companies successful and what doesn't. And in addition to working with a great team across Ireland of DAs and that, launching some innovative projects along with Jen Scanlon, who actually is working with me here in Northwell as well now, and creating a cluster of gastroenterology for Ireland and launching it at one of the biggest global conferences called Digestive Disease Week, which was really exciting because it sort of merged the whole area of gastroenterology, which Ireland has a high competency for, with companies, with academia and commercial. So from there, then I jumped in to be CEO of a life science company, an EHR company, for a few years. And at the time created, as I mentioned to you before, Rosemary, my own advisory board. And one of those advisors was Michael Dowling, who many of you have probably heard of. Michael then recruited me into Northwell to create what's now known as Pharma Ventures, which, at the time gave me the latitude to really just be innovative. And from then, I've been here for 5 years. I've had the luxury of using that innovation to be able to create other platforms, such as our international platform, and more recently, which I guess we'll talk about later, is our Nurse Hero and Women Who Dared women's initiatives. So that's sort of it in a snapshot. I sound like I'm 100, but
I didn't want to ask. If any of our audience members have questions that occur to you through the session, I encourage you to use the Q&A function, and I'll keep an eye on those and monitor them. And if timely and pertinent, ask them during the discussion. If not, hopefully we'll get to them at the end. Elaine, just help me with kind of grounding all of this in your roots. What did you study in college?
So I studied sciences in Galway and then polymer science in England. So it was really, science, although I feel like sometimes I should have studied psychiatry with all the expansion of networks and that. So although I'm more heavily involved in art now, my career has been more of a lattice than a ladder. And I think that has been, by design, it looks like it was a natural progression, but a lot of times it was fate and luck and perseverance. So it's been an interesting ride.
Absolutely. From your experience with Enterprise Ireland and your current role with Northwell, can you tell us a little bit about what makes a company, and I'll actually extend that to say what makes a person a good fit for the US market?
So a person is, well, for me anyhow, I think having the basic, and I always used to say this to companies when I worked in Enterprise Ireland, is that America is a completely different culture, and it's a microcosm of different cultures. Like the East Coast is completely different to the West Coast. And that is, with respect to your approach to business and just, culturally speaking, with how you interact with locals, let's say. So I think, when you're prepared to, if it's a company and you want to do business in the US, there are certain key things that are very important to Americans. And, with my experience anyhow in dealing with them and companies, and communication is really important. So for example, I know it's really silly or it sounds very minuscule, but if you don't know the answer to something and they're waiting for it, get back and say, I don't have the answer now. I'll be back to you within the week. So that way, it's sort of keeping those lines open. So culturally speaking, I also think knowing your market is exceptionally important, especially if you're in business and selling into the United States. It is a little different. So it's a little softer here, I'd say, than Europe, where, they do like to create and forge a relationship with the person versus a straight up kind of procurement transaction. So developing your connections and leveraging that from a cultural perspective is important.
Okay. I think we often sort of talk about the Irish advantage, and we like to think of ourselves as Irish people as being particularly good at doing business in the US. I suspect there's some truth in that. I suspect that there is something in our demeanor that makes it easier for us. Do you have anything that you're able to share about times that has gone well or even poorly?
Yeah, I think I definitely think being Irish is a huge help. And I think when I say help, I mean it's a great door opener. At the end of the day, it is still a sophisticated market. So just because you're Irish and you're waving the Irish flag or is a door opener, as I said, but it's certainly not going to be the driver of the business. You still have to have a very competitive product. You still have to forge those relationships, know your market, know your pricing. But the door opener is also key and can accelerate the sales cycle once you have that door opener. Like, for example, in a system like Northwell, the sales cycle traditionally would be 3 to 4 years before you've actually a sale exploited or executed. So having those door openers are huge, which led me to creating the international program. So companies in the Enterprise Ireland scope, or now we've expanded it to Israel and to Canada and other countries. So they have that direct link into a system like ours, thereby cutting their sales cycle.
Excellent. So I think it really speaks to this power of maintaining a network of people that can support and can open those doors and so forth.
Yeah.
I think you're really exemplar in terms of building and respecting your network. Can you tell us? You mentioned the build your own advisory board thing. How did that develop for you? It feels, when we tell the story, a very organic thing, but it's not. It's something that you have to work at. It's something you have to maintain. Tell us.
Yes, very important point. It sounds easy, but it is complex, and it's something that has to be taken very seriously because, and I can tell you, it's so easy burn a bridge, and it takes a long time to build them. My rule of thumb is you don't really have a relationship with anyone until you've met them. Well, now with COVID, it's a little bit more difficult, but met them at least 5 times. And when it comes to connections, the reason the network's important is because, especially if you're a business or somebody coming to the United States, you want to have that first reference point. You want to have, a key site where you can either kick off as a pilot or kick off your product into procurement. And that network and those connections can be pivotal in making that happen. For me personally, I realized very early on, and believe it or not, Mary Rogers is on the phone here. She will remember this. When we were back in the day in America, there were no cell phones. There was no internet to look for jobs. So building the network was sort of very important and instrumental. And that's why, from BioLink, I was able to jump into Enterprise Ireland. But it was there that I realized having not just a network, but my own personal advisory boards, let's call it, of key successful industry leaders. And I picked 4 leaders. I picked like finance and life sciences and 2 others. And Michael Dowling was obviously one of my mentors. And I think this is something that, sort of resonated very well with me. I was quite stunned that I've never had anyone say no to being a mentor. People like to help, and they like to know that they're wanted to help and that they're respected to be there as an advisor. And, I only had about 4 at the time. And I think that being able to touch base, and they don't always tell you what you want to hear either. And I can tell you, like, I, was in a position where I could have made a very serious career flaw, a move that would have been detrimental, whereas one of my advisors basically stepped up to the plate and said, run for the hills. But I had had a coffee with them. My expectation, and I set it out ahead of time, is that I would really appreciate you being a mentor advisor to me. That would be coffee 3 times a year, just sort of laid it out and maybe touch base, and something very simple, but they are those relationships have been very pivotal, and now work for Michael in one of, the most, I guess, popular or well-known health systems in the world right now during COVID. So it's certainly something I would advise people if you have the luxury of knowing somebody in that kind of space that you want to get into.
You're right. It is flattering. I've actually done it once myself, and I think the person was flattered to be asked, hadn't thought of themselves as a mentor until that point. And it can be a very reciprocal in a relationship as well. This the mentee gets something out of it too, or as well as the mentor, I think. So I was going to ask about that first kind of awkward moment. It feels a little bit like asking someone to be your friend in a very interesting way. Yeah. Okay. So we were talking a bit before the webinar about kind of Northwell Health, how the health system has managed during the pandemic. But one thing that you really sunk home to me was the scale of Northwell Health as an entity. And I was wondering if you could do that for our webinar participants as well.
Yeah, Northwell, and it's funny because it's like when you think of Northwell or health systems, you think of, healthcare and you think of patients. But Northwell in particular is unique because it is an integrated health system, which means we take care of patients from birth all the way through to end of life. And in addition to that, Northwell has the largest real estate footprint in the Northeast. It has the highest consumption of food. So when you think about companies coming to America, whether they're in the construction engineering space, we're still a target and should be considered a target. So Northwell, has Michael Dowling as our CEO, president and CEO, obviously an Irishman, and, has really driven this organization to the successful part it is to the point it is today. Like, we're double the size of our nearest competitor. And when you think of New York health systems, I don't know in Ireland, but if that familiar, but Columbia, Mount Sinai, Presbyterian, they're all sort of the main guys, whereas we're 3 times the size of them. So that's a great thing. And it's, obviously you can imagine the complexity. We've 77,000 employees. We've 23 main hospitals with close to 1,000 ambulatory groups. We also have our research institute, the Feinstein Research Institute, where many Irish companies are actually doing clinical trials. And, and I think that we're certainly a destination for healthcare companies and life science companies to come and try and, either be a pilot site, reference site, procurement, or clinical trial.
I was listening to the Northwell Health podcast, and there was a fabulous interview with Michael Dowling about leadership during the pandemic and the things that you've learned from previous crises. He referenced specifically 9/11 and learning how to respond to crisis in real time and innovating towards crisis. And he mentioned this massive lab, and people kind of wonder why are you building a lab? There are labs, but we learned during a pandemic that first of all there's not enough, and it really sunk home for me, this idea that you don't just need innovative devices to help your patients. You need innovation in how you feed your staff, how you pay your staff, how you connect them. And I've understood that Northwell has really innovated in lots of different directions during the pandemic, and demonstrated a lot of leadership. Can you tell us about some of the big learnings from the last year?
Right. Yeah. And it is true. Like, what is that phrase they say? A crisis is an awful thing to waste. We certainly have, the few silver linings that have come out of this global pandemic with respect to healthcare is the accelerated use of technology. We certainly, from adoption and behavior change, had to really pivot on that one. And one such area that I think I was surprised at is wound care. It's considered an elective surgery. And as you know, during the pandemic, we had to cut all of our elective surgeries. And wound care to some would be considered crucial, because when you think about diabetic foot and different areas of wound care, ulcers, etc., would need immediate attention. So our head of wound care actually pivoted, used this technology actually that she just adopted maybe a year ago, but not really used, and basically created a new workflow. What was important here was that the government and commercial payers had agreed to reimburse for, let's call it telehealth and telecare. So that made it easier to see patients via this platform. So it actually has proven to be way more effective, way more accurate, way safer using this technology versus patients coming into the office, with open wounds, being exposed to now, whether it's viruses or bacteria, etc. So now they just upload their photo onto their phone, put it onto this platform, or link it to the platform that we have in Northwell, and that's really accelerated also patient throughput. So there really is a lot of positives from this, and this side of innovation is actually now going to be adopted. I believe her next rollout is in Africa. So so that's one such one that I can think of.
I'm going to ask a question that I think we hear a lot when we're talking about innovation towards pandemic, which is, do you think it'll continue? Do you think that the needs must adaptations we've made in health systems will continue? Or do you have any feeling on which will continue and which may not?
Yeah, I suppose from our side, I think there will certainly be continuation on the telehealth side, because it really does. And this is what I said earlier, it's about knowing your market. At the end of the day, we lost close to, I believe, $1.5 billion through the pandemic, because obviously elective surgeries is probably one of the key areas we would have generated revenue as a system. We're back now doing elective surgeries, but at the end of the day, we have to recoup those losses somehow. And so yes, telehealth and those kind of areas, that reimbursement will continue. Technology will continue to strive and definitely be a key factor for companies wanting to do business with us. Having those solutions are certainly things we're interested in. Another thing, bringing that up is one of the areas of crisis, and it's sort of something that I'm working on now and I've touched on, is the nurse heroes. Within the next 2 years, as per the World Health Organization, there will be at least 1 to 2 million fewer nurses in the United States. Globally, I'm not sure what the number is, but it's a very serious crisis that we're looking at. And we need to do something about it. So that's where I sort of pivoted and created this whole opportunity to leverage what we have with this art collection that I haven't mentioned yet, but it is something we created a Nurse Hero campaign. So drawing attention to the lack of nurses, the importance of building up the nursing communities, and drawing attention to what we call nurse heroes, especially during the pandemic that we've just had. So so on the flip side, we do need to address what, crises are coming around the corner with respect to resourcing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just about to jump into Nurse Heroes. I would remind everybody that the Q&A function is open. I see we have 1 or 2 coming in, but I've I think we'll answer that one at the end. But please feel free to derail the chat here and interrupt us and change our directions. Not just yet. Let's talk about the Women Who Dared collection. 330 works by female artists from 7 continents, spanning 2,500 years. Did I read that right? Telling the story of grit and perseverance of women in the arts and celebrating their artistic talents. You can donate at nurseheroes.org. Elaine, tell us about the campaign.
Yeah, so the Women Who Dared is a collection. One of the jobs that Michael has given me is to manage our special projects. So this couple in Santa Barbara came under the partnership that we have with the Carlisle Philanthropy Group. And I suppose it's almost 2 years ago when I hosted an event here in New York with the Carlisle Philanthropy Group. And out of that came this relationship with a couple in California who have spent the last 35 years of their lives collecting women-only artists. And the reason was that about 30 years ago or 35 years ago, they were traveling the world and noticed in whatever museum they were in that the most art of female artists hung in the walls of this museum was about 4%. And so they made it their mission to start this collection. They traveled 7 continents over this 30-year span, and the collection itself, which I've had the privilege of seeing a few times, goes back to 500 BC. So it's actually closer to 400 pieces, but over the year of this relationship development with the Nicholsons, they've made a decision to donate the collection to Northwell. So we had been working on that right around this time last year, or up to this time last year, and we're about to receive the collection when COVID hit. So at the time, we had planned on leveraging the collection with female artists to do other things. And I had the luxury also of being at Davos the year before, where we showed the collection. Myself and Sandy Nicholson went there and, got a lot of attention because just the opportunity to leverage and use it for female empowerment, that would fall under diversity and inclusion. And, we're bringing it to Northwell, looking at different ways to expose the collection to patients, to the population, to nurses, to the community, etc. So we had to put a halt on that and didn't want to lose 2020 being the 100-year anniversary of the suffragettes and also the 200-year anniversary of Florence Nightingale's birth. So we created Nurse Heroes. And Nurse Heroes is a campaign that basically highlights and acknowledges nurses. We kicked it off with a bunch of celebrities: Celine Dion, Josh Groban, Andrew Bocelli, at a concert on Thanksgiving Day. We're raising attention, and I believe and I can send it to you, Rosemary, afterwards if anyone's interested in seeing the concert. I think it's still up on nurseheroes.org. But that, has led to this whole wave of enthusiasm and energy around acknowledging nurses as heroes. There's an art campaign. If you go into nurseheroes.org, the concert itself got 1.5 billion hits and over 10 million views for the concert and 25 million impressions, etc. So it just tells you and resonates the importance of nurses and how people are acknowledging it worldwide, that they're a crucial source for us to acknowledge and to honor. So this has been a real, one of the highlights of my career is for sure to be able to be in a position to have created this along with Alex Charlton and Jen Scanlon, but also this is only the beginning, and we're working on the next concert with a lot of exciting celebrities from the UK, and we're now in the position. We also created a nurse choir, which have just actually heard a couple of weeks ago. They've been asked to audition at America's Got Talent. So we're going to have fewer nurses. they're all going to be out in Hollywood.
Well, if I could scare our audience into taking this seriously, I mean, the reality is that we live in an aging world, and all of us will be provider or carers at some point in our lives. So you really need to take care of your nurses now, or you're going to be in big trouble when you're the older generation, and indeed you yourself get a little bit older. And it's a fantastic campaign. I had a look through some of the art. It's not only very well recognized artists. I saw some Frida Kahlo, but it's also referencing, there's a print of Lucille Ball and other women in art that aren't getting the front cover of the big galleries. We're getting some questions coming in. I'm going to abuse Chair's privilege just a little bit longer as we kind of go back to talking, and we have a lot of people from the startup community on the line, not just in the healthcare sector. We talked a little bit before about strategic partnerships, how we can learn from the behavior of large organizations during the pandemic and for our own development. I think this idea of developing strategic partnerships is really important. How do you, as a early stage startup, understand the importance of strategic partnerships and start thinking about it from the beginning? What should you be thinking about?
When you say strategic partnerships, do you mean like potential clients for early? Okay. And this is something actually I've said recently and many times over. If you're, and I just want to give an example. If you're a company whose product serves patients, the patient population, whether it's a device or whether it's a solution or a therapeutic, no matter what it is, healthcare systems are the obvious kind of go-to customer to knock on their doors and say, buy my products. I'm just simplifying this. But actually, healthcare systems struggle financially. We're, we are not for profit. Our margins are 0.4%. But on the flip side, a lot of pharma companies and biotech companies are constantly trying to differentiate themselves and their products. And I'm finding that third-party sales destinations like a pharma company would be more willing to look at your product if it has the endpoint of a potential patient to sell. And I've done many of these. In fact, some Irish companies, I've worked with them on this, where let the pharma company pay for your product and we will use it. And then it's sort of like, it's a more direct route actually to a sale. And pharma companies are way more eager to see solutions for patients, whereas health systems are like, that means a complete change in workflow. We have to find the budget for it. Again, going back into that 3-year sales cycle. So there's different ways to, skin a cat, but certainly understanding the market and forging those partnerships is really critical. I think when you talk about strategic partners, don't just think linearly that, oh, I need to sell to Northwell. No, actually, maybe Pfizer, or any of the big boys, Merck, etc., might be more interested. And can somebody like Elaine facilitate those introductions? Yes, that's what we do, as part of having your network. Now, I'm not offering that up, by the way, just as an important factor in developing and forging your own network. This is what the network can do for you.
I'm going to take a question from the chat because it's pertinent just to this, what we're discussing right now. What about collaborations with insurance companies? Any thoughts on that?
So it depends with what context. So is it a product that's already approved and has a diagnosis code or a code that's already, or are you looking to create a new code, which is also possible? But if you were looking to create a new code with an insurance company, then you're probably going to have a champion, a therapeutic champion, like partnering with the Northwell, whatever disease area you're in, whether it's cardiology or oncology. You'd have to have that champion that can either help you facilitate those nuances around getting a new, whether it's an ICD code, etc. But yeah, partnering with insurance companies, depending on what the product is definitely the way of the future, I believe. We're looking at a lot of projects now where we have a pharma and an insurance company looking at whether it's a population health study, to look at how does a population respond to a therapeutic or a device, and getting reimbursement in that way.
Okay. Folks, that you're welcome to ask questions both in the chat and the Q&A. I will say it makes it easier for me if you use the Q&A. So I'm going to do a little bit of skimming for a moment while I have another question for Elaine myself. We talked a little bit about the differences between the way we do business in Ireland, and then we can extend that to Europe, the US, and you've given us some good grounding there. Make sure you follow up punctually, use the Irish connection to open a door, meet somebody 5 times. What advice would you give to an Irish startup approaching Northwell or any large US company, and assume complete naivety here? What angle of approach would you take for the idea of selling their product?
Right, and I think again it goes back to, like, Americans are very open, I feel, so do your homework, get on LinkedIn, find out, are there Irish people in that organization? Obviously, Enterprise Ireland, and we have this connection, that I'm responsible for Irish companies. So, we meet, we do Zooms, we, source and filter companies. And, one of the most important things actually, and it's interesting, like the thank you emails that I get for helping companies, the ones that are most prolific are the ones where they found out early on in their sales cycle to not do business in the United States. They either didn't have the resources, they didn't have the funding, and they didn't have the manpower. So to know that very early on can save a company a lot of time, money, and effort. So, yeah, I think doing your homework and reaching out to people, again, everyone is amenable to helping. It doesn't mean you sell your product, but it means getting that leg in the door, which is crucial.
Okay, so we're getting some questions in the chat here. This is a provocative one. Hi, Elaine, you mentioned Pfizer and Merck in your role with Northwell. Who is the most innovative Irish healthcare that you have dealt with? I'll let you abstract that as much as you wish.
Well, I know Aoife Niwuri is on the phone, so I better say Salasso.
There we go.
And Aoife is a company that actually I would acknowledge as a very innovative and agile company, I guess is the right way to say it, because they also had to pivot during COVID, and they created solutions for Northwell in the pulmonology space. And I'm sure Aoife could go into more detail, but I know when we look at companies that are successful that we do business with, agility is really important. And being able to respond and be here, outside of COVID, being present is certainly very, very important. So, and Aoife and her team have always been here. And I know that the feedback, I get through my colleagues here at Northwell on their product is spectacular. So she has a physical therapy program, and, I'm sure anyone who wants information on her product can get it from you guys. But yeah, I think Salasso certainly, there's lots of great companies, bigger companies too, that we've worked with. Big, when I say, I think there's one pulmonology company, there's quite a few of them, but yeah, there's so many innovative technology companies coming out of Ireland that we're excited to be doing business with.
I think as well, innovation is becoming much more expected and accepted in large industry. And it is about what you've just said about, doing your homework, finding the person in those organizations that is receptive to innovative methods and has a bit of leeway to follow their passion projects. So David, perhaps you can find a contact in one of those organizations, ask them to be your mentor, and take it from there. We have a lot of questions about Elaine. As predicted, and these aren't all from me, as predicted, folks who want to follow in your career path. So first one, in your own career path, how have you chosen your next steps that build on your success? How do you make those choices?
I've always been one, I've never really, even though when I left the world of science, it was because I realized I was never going to be a great scientist, so I'm like, why am I doing this? I may as well be earning more money somewhere else. So I sort of packed my bags and went to New York that time. And to be quite honest with you, I was very motivated by the commercial world and wanted to get more exposure to that. So is the question more about why I made changes? Is that, sorry,
It's about your strategy for making changes. I guess if I could editorialize a lot on this question, sorry, Kenny. Are you always somebody that's had a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan? Are you somebody who responds to opportunity? How do you think about those things?
Yeah, I suppose, one of the beauty, what the advantages of the United States that I've learned, I've been here a long time, is that, you don't have to follow the mold. So, and that's the exciting part, is that people here, I feel, always have accepted, oh yeah, I used to do that, but now I'm doing something different. But I never followed the path of that's going to get me another raise or that's going to get me a promotion. When I took the job at Enterprise Ireland, I think I took a 70% pay cut. I had to give up my company car and my phone. But I took it because I knew it would expand my network and expand, the knowledge in different sectors. And that's how, even though I've sort of stayed in life sciences, I have done almost 360, except for insurance. I've gone from the bench to research to launching blockbuster products to now sort of healthcare with patients. And I think it's always been about, what's exciting around the corner.
Another one of the questions is about your major career pivot, and you joked about your $5 paycheck for your patent. What was the most difficult part of making a career change that significant?
I guess the most difficult part was that I was a lab rat. I was in a lab for most of my career. I had to come to New York, to Mary Rogers, would remember these years. And there was no networking, there was no internet. So you're literally looking at the back of a paper, and I was changing my career. So I actually knew I wanted to get into the pharma space. I applied to the pharma industry, but they saw me as a lab rat. So I didn't even get a response. I think I sent out 100 job applications and I got nothing back. So what I had to do was I took a job in a doctor's office. So I knew by working in a doctor's office, I would meet the sales reps from the pharma companies and start handing out my CV. So, and at the time, sales reps were given a commission for anyone they get hired. So they were motivated to hire people. And, I think I spent a couple of weeks working for a doctor and finally started interviewing them at Roche and DuPont and different companies and ended up with Roche. So that was the biggest challenge. There was no real communication, there was no real network. And I think I realized then, that the importance of a network too in getting your name out there.
So effectively you conducted a gap analysis on your own, on your own persona and then skill fed it. So you could, okay, cool. That's how you do it. Okay, skimming the questions. Okay, let's go into more questions about healthcare systems. Are you seeing more work on prevention as we move into more population health approaches? What do you think about incentives that would love to know if you think incentives are changing because of this?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things like preventions and screenings and population health. And I know that we're working on, a lot of big programs with our diabetic community, etc. I do think, we're starting to see government and commercial payers look at reimbursement for things like remote patient monitoring. So patients wearing EKGs or, pulse oximeters, etc. So they're getting reimbursed for that. In fact, Maxi Return, Mary Maroney, and Marie might be on the phone here today. They are experts in that space. So we know that when reimbursement kicks in, the companies will follow. But certainly as a health system, we're very, very focused on prevention. And we have teams around, we have population health teams. So as you know, you may not know, we were one of the most diverse health systems in the country. And ranging from, Park Avenue to Staten Island, and with pockets of, I think, 120 different languages within patients. So screening, education are definitely programs that, in my team, like we look at the pharmaceutical industry as ways as well to help partner with us to educate. So if we look at Novo Nordisk or some companies that are focused on diabetes, Merck, etc., we'll partner with them to roll out particular campaigns on education within the communities and community-led programs.
Can I also just say Northwell is doing a very good job of informing patient populations during the pandemic. I noticed the podcast series that's geared towards mental health and mental health for staff members, and I'd like to praise you on that. It was it's a very holistic approach, and it's very gratifying to see it. Okay, we've got a lot of questions who want the roadmap. We've talked a little bit about some of this. What are things companies do well when they're trying to do business with Northwell? What are the mistakes to avoid? Similarly, if I wanted to try US entry for my business, given the present landscape, what are the first 5 steps? Let's draw it out for them. So we've got do your research.
Right, do your research, get your reference site. Like if it is Northwell for your product, I will say persistence pays. So we all have very busy jobs. So, so I'm not saying me, but if you have a meeting canceled, get it back on the calendar as soon as possible, reschedule. But persistence is as annoying as it might be. It could be shooting myself in the foot with this one, but be annoying, but respectful, obviously, and never reach out to people after you've forged, made the connection without adding something of value. Like often with my mentor group, I don't reach out to them unless I see an article in, online or something, or a publication that I feel they might be interested in. Always add value. I think that having your reference site first, identifying your reference site. Do not just because you get a reference site, there are key things and attributes that are really important there. Make sure that you have champions within that reference site. So if you have technology and you're going to come to Northwell and we're going to roll it out as a pilot, and sometimes you might have to do a free pilot to get into a system like our size. Make sure that the people that you're doing the pilot with are on board and want this to be successful. Otherwise, you're just wasting your time, because a lot of times it's what you hear may not be what's actually happening in the background. So you really need to have those champions side by side with you as you go through it. You map out clear and defined boundaries, like what is the length of time for the pilot, how long, what's your procurement time for getting a check or whatever, what's your IT sign off, etc. So all of those are really important aspects to have defined with whoever your internal stakeholder that's going to work with you on it is.
Okay. Let's do some rapid fire US healthcare questions. 10 seconds to answer. No, I'm joking. Do you need clinical endorsement? This was a question about remote monitoring codes, but clinical endorsements, do those help?
So
I presume it's a question of having a clinician on board, having a clinician on the team, having some clinical, what are the words that they look for, the recommendations that you put on the last slide of the deck?
Yeah, I think that if you mean like having like a medical director or a clinician on your team, I think, there's ways to do that. If you're tight financially or resource-wise, you can have an advisor or a consultant that, again, have a defined scope of work for that person. But certainly having, if it is a medical or healthcare product, you absolutely need to have a clinician or a medical director sign off.
Yeah. We have some questions about tips for engaging the integrated delivery network. Is there, of course, in Ireland, we have a procurement system. In the UK, we have the clinical commissioners. How does it work in the US?
Yeah, I think, look, at the end of the day, whatever your product is, whatever, who's buying your product, it's he who holds the purse strings has the power. So you have to know where the budget is coming from. So let's say, for example, it's a cardiology product, but if the budget is coming from IT, you're really selling into IT. You might need the cardiology team's support. You might need a champion in there or a stakeholder. But at the end of the day, it's who's paying for it. And within integrated health systems like ours, every team, across whatever sector they're in, we all have our own individual budgets. And, it's again, the sales cycle. So if you've got, we're up for, we call it the flash. If you're up for defending your budget or asking for more for next year, it happens around October. So, typically speaking, most, budgets in Northwell would probably be exhausted by June or July. So you're looking at next November to potentially get onto a budget cycle. So there are certain nuances that you need to be aware of there.
Okay. For the final question before we wrap the webinar, I'm gonna give you a classic dichotomy. A question from Ella: do you think the Irish or the American healthcare system treats doctors better, or is it better for junior doctors? I think we have a junior doctor on the line.
All right. See, I wouldn't really know that much about the Irish health system, except from what I remember when I was young. But I definitely think that it's like, for example, Harvard Medical System now recommend Northwell to do your residency program because it's on the ground. Day one, you're out in the field. It's way more practical. You get a full range of experience rather than sort of being bucketed into whether it's ER, special class. So I can only really vouch for what I know here, which is, of course, Ireland's amazing, but I do think you get a lot more exposure here to different scenarios and situations.
Yeah. And I think what we've seen from your own career is that as much of that different exposure as possible, and Elaine Brennan makes. So thank you very much for everybody for submitting your questions. I promised that I wouldn't go over time, and I did it anyway, but not too bad. Elaine, it has been an absolute honor to have you and to learn from your own career path and the work that you're doing. A reminder again, that the website for the Women Who Dared campaign is nurseheroes.org. And we hope to have you back soon for another webinar in the Irish Voices and Global Perspectives series. Next week, we have Dave Cunningham with Paul Kenny coming to us from the other side of the world. Elaine, thanks again.
Thank you, Rosemary, and the Porter Shed and all the team there. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Goodbye.